In an open letter to the governor-elect, New Orleans City Councilwoman Moreno lists what she calls immediate needs for the city.
As Sabrina Wilson reports, his New Orleans Transition Committee, which features no council members or anyone from the mayor's administration, met for the first time in Lafayette.
Governor-elect Jeff Landry was asked if he plans to speak with Mayor Cantrell or New Orleans City Council members since they're not on his transition panel focused entirely on the city.
Absolutely. Look, I've spoken to, I know for sure, one city council member already.
Councilman Oliver Thomas confirmed Landry spoke to him.
So I want to let that committee do its business, and then we'll be visiting with those leaders. I think that it's probably a bit premature for us to visit with them yet.
In answering that question about whether he will talk to New Orleans City Council members or the mayor, Landry also weighed in on how he thinks New Orleans is being run.
I don't know anyone, including them, that believes that the city of New Orleans is being run like an absolute professional football team. Okay.
City Council Vice President Moreno sent this letter to Landry and members of his transition panel, writing she's been contacted by many members of the committee to provide guidance on the city's challenges.
I put 20 different items that on day one, the governor-elect could immediately start focusing on. All different types of issues, from crime prevention to improving health outcomes to helping with illegal dumping and preventing that in our city, all different types of budgetary issues that could potentially help our city.
Moreno also wrote that she'd prefer New Orleans legislative delegation members collectively weigh in and have them take the lead in providing a comprehensive list of legislative priorities.
So I know that they could move forward our particular interests because they meet with us and talk with us so much.
Mayor Cantrell was asked about the committee having some members who supported a recall effort against her.
We're trying to get to a unified approach, and in order to do that, you have to have all schools of thoughts at the table.
Dillard University political analyst Dr. Robert Collins thinks the mayor's stance is prudent.
Regardless of who serves on the committee or doesn't serve on the committee, the mayor has to work with the governor.
And he's not surprised by who is and isn't on Landry's committee.
Because incoming governors generally pick people who either supported them during the election and they consider them to be already team players, or they pick people who they think can add some sort of perspective that they don't have.
Are you miffed at all that no one from the city council is on this panel?
I really don't have time to get miffed anymore.
Councilman Oliver Thomas sent a statement about his talk with Landry, saying our core topic of the discussion was about crime and especially what we can do to curb juvenile delinquency and crime, and how do we educate and reintegrate juveniles who are remanded to the justice system. Meg.
Thank you, Sabrina.